Hi there. Today we are making Fregolotta. I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I think I am. It is an Italian jam tart, and it's a recipe that I pull out when we have, I don't know, Thanksgiving, Christmas, people are coming over. It's really easy to make, I promise. It's basically like making shortbread, which sounds daunting and is not. And all you need to have is some jam and nuts around, and it is endlessly adaptable depending on what kind of jam you have, depending on what kind of nuts you have, and I suppose you could even throw some spices in if you wanted to. So we're going to make a blueberry tart today because that's a jam we had in the fridge that I wanted to use up. So let's get at it. We're going to start with some room temperature, aka softened, so not straight out of the fridge, butter. All measurements will be down below if you click on show more.
And that would be unsalted butter, correct?
It is unsalted butter. You could do this with salted butter, but yeah, you assume if I say butter, I mean unsalted because that's what we keep in the house. And then we have some sugar here.
Yeah, I've seen that before.
Yeah. Excellent. I'm so happy. And now I am going to use the handy dandy KitchenAid here. If you have a hand mixer of the variety, go ahead and use that. Pretty much any kind of mixer like that will work. I don't think you can use a food processor for this. I wouldn't want to try and do it by hand because when you are beating butter and sugar together, you're trying to, you're not just mixing the two things, it changes color. It gets lighter and kind of fluffier. And that's the thing that happens using an automated machine, that you may be able to get it to work by hand, and presumably people did for a really long time, but I'm not sure we have the arm muscles, and I think we're all too lazy to do that. So get one of those, because you can usually pick them up at like a Salvation Army for $5.
Is that the brand name?
No, it's not. But I think they're called a hand mixer, but I think there are other things that you can call a hand mixer.
An electric mixer or electric beater.
No, see, this is also that. So electric beaters, sure. The ones where you push the button and the two beaters pop out, right. That kind of thing.
And then the kids fight over who gets to lick the thing.
Exactly. That's what we're going for here if you don't have a KitchenAid. And what I was saying is you can often pick it up at a thrift store for $5 or $10. So highly recommend having one of those in your cupboard. Now I'm going to get started on this and I'll show you that, but then we're going to cut away because you don't need to watch this beat for 3 or 4 minutes, and that's about how long it's going to take.
Whip it good.
So let's get it started. Actually, it's not whipping, it's beating.
Ooh.
Difference.
Oh, she's beating me. Gotta go.
Oh, please. This is a family show, Rob. So you can see the butter is going up against the edges.
Oh, she'll not take the strain cutting.
Well, it will, and I'm going to keep it going, but like I said, you don't need to see 3 or 4 minutes of that. What you're going to see is when we come back what it looks like. See you then.
All right.
So about 3 or 4 minutes has gone by, and if you take a look, you'll see that the butter and sugar mixture is it's lighter in color and it's got a fluffy texture to it, and that's what we were going for. The next thing we're putting in is almond extract. This is actually a little bit discolored or not clear. Most almond extracts you get will be clear. This one's homemade, so that's why it's different looking. And we're just going to barely mix that in. Next, we have salt and flour.
Yeah, we've seen that.
So this is finely ground salt or fine sea salt. You'll see in almost all of my my videos that we're using coarse grain kosher salt. You can take that coarse grain kosher salt and pop it in a blender or a spice grinder and get something fine, which is what I did here, because I don't like to have more than one kind of salt on hand, but most people do have fine salt around. So I'm putting that into the flour. And I'm just going to mix it so that we don't have a pocket of salt there. Now we're going to have to put the flour in, I think, in more than one batch, because otherwise with the KitchenAid you get this big poof and you get a cloud of white everywhere.
Scene from Scarface or something.
Yeah, so we're not doing that here. So what I'm going to do is just put in a couple of spoonfuls, maybe 3, and turn it on low. And all we're trying to do here is get that flour incorporated. We're not beating it for any other purpose, so you don't want to keep it going. You don't want to overbeat at this point.
That'll work the gluten in it or something?
Exactly. What happens is the more you work the flour, you build the gluten in there and it gets tougher. And we're not looking for that in a tart. We just want to make sure that the flour gets fully mixed in. The time for beating when you're baking, yes, is usually the butter sugar bit and often with the eggs. Not always though. And so read your recipe carefully. When your recipe says to you, put in 1 egg at a time, beat between eggs, that sort of thing. Pay attention because it actually makes a difference in how your cake or your tart or whatever it is you're making turns out.
But a tough tart can take a good beating.
Oh boy, no longer a family-friendly show. So on that note, I'm going to turn this loud thing on again and try not to get sprayed with flour.
Oh, well done. Nuggety.
Yeah, and we're kind of going for that. So I think I can probably put the rest of it in at this point. Yeah, and I'm just going to mix it until we can't see the flour. I see that there's just a little bit up on the side there, so I'm going to give this a quick scrape.
That's cool.
And then we're going to call it a day. For this bit, for that step. So, I'm going to just get all of the dough off of the beater. I know, Rob, you have just endless double entendres you're working on there, aren't you?
No, I've just been napping, actually.
Oh, thanks for that vote of confidence. Oh, folks, yes, married life. Generally, he's supportive. Okay, so I'm going to use my hands because I told you already that I'm a hands-on kind of gal.
Hey, we're married, it's okay.
This is how I do things. And yeah, I washed my hands beforehand.
Uh-huh.
Rightio. So, the next step here, and what makes this recipe just a little bit different, is I'm going to take a 1/4 cup of this dough. Sorry, a 1/2 cup, not a 1/4 cup. Like that. I'm going to put it on a plate, and while we're doing everything else, this plate's going to go in the freezer. And you'll see why later, but I'm just putting it like that in the freezer. And what we're going to do with the rest of it, now I adapted this recipe from one I found online, and I'll put the link to the original recipe down below. I adapted it so the measurements are all by weight because I prefer to bake that way. I will put the approximate volume measurements in there as well, but they're going to be weird, like a scant cup of something because it ended up being 0.9 instead of a full cup.
Just get a scale. Just get a scale.
So, but the reason I adapted it is because my pan, I wanted to use the handy dandy one that has the removable bottom because I prefer that for a tart like this. You can use another kind of pan. You could even use like a square, like a brownie tin. You'll have a little bit of a harder time getting the tart pieces out, and you certainly won't get it out all in one go unless maybe you line it with parchment. This doesn't need to be buttered. It doesn't, because there's so much butter in here. It doesn't need to be lined, anything like that. But if you change the kind of pan that you're using, this is a 10.5 inch one, if you change the size, the volume's going to be different, your baking time's going to be different. So you need to adjust accordingly. There are websites that show you how to do that. I'm not the person to do that for you.
Make a spreadsheet.
What we're going to do is, oh, I see I got a bit of flour that's not completely mixed in the bottom, but that's not the end of the world. Just give it a quick mix here. And we're going to put all the remaining dough into the tart pan here. And it's fine that it looks like this. It's crumbly and kind of like shortbread, where again, you don't want to overwork it. If there's a little bit of flour in there, that's okay, because we're going to press this in. And you're going to see how the flour just melds right into all that butter and sugar. Now, if it gets sticky, which this is starting to do, what you can do is you can put your dough into, or your pan with the dough in it, into the fridge for a few minutes to set up. But because I have some flour here, I think I can still do this. All we're trying to do is press it flat into the pan.
Do you build up an edge around the...
No, so this is different than like the pie that I did. You know what? This is too soft and I'm going to have to put it in the fridge for a few minutes. Stuff like that happens. We'll come back when I can work with it again. So we took it out of the fridge and it's not cold, but it's colder, and that's allowing me to press it into the pan. And the only thing I would say here, you're trying to get it even, but I wouldn't worry about it being even. The only thing you want to make sure is that the middle is not the thickest bit. So I'm almost done there. And if it got really sticky again, either I could put it back in the fridge, which would be my first choice, or I could dip my fingers into a little bit of flour, but we don't want to add a lot of extra flour to this. So there you go. Again, doesn't need to be perfect. Nobody's going to see that bit.
It's a Julia Child moment.
Exactly. So then we have some jam. Now you can use any jam you want. The original recipe I read called for a not too sweet apricot jam. And apricot jams often have that lovely tang to them. And because the shortbread crust is pretty sweet, I get why you wouldn't want it to be a super sweet jam. So this blueberry was quite sweet. So what I decided to do was I added a little bit of lime juice. And you can see the texture is a little on the runny side, but that's not a problem. And that lime juice I added gave it just a bit of a tang and cut through some of the sweetness. This is I think it was 1/3 of a cup of jam. And like I said, any jam you want. Change up the fruit. Homemade, store-bought, doesn't really matter. This happens to be a homemade one. And what you want to do is spread the jam around. Hopefully I can do this with a spoon, not my fingers in this case. But you want to leave about 1 inch from the edge.
Oh, because it sort of melts out into the edge or something?
Yeah, and you don't want it going over, yes.
The jam's not going to hold.
And that's it. Again, we're not going for pretty because that's not really important in this case. Nor does it need to be perfect. There's some areas that are a little bit closer and some that are a little further away, but as long as we got a bit of a border there, we're good.
You're plenty pretty and perfect, I might be.
Thanks, hon. He's trying to redeem himself. So then, these are slivered almonds. Now, I usually do sliced almonds, which I prefer for this, but I have done, I've done chopped up hazelnuts, I've done chopped up pecans. So it's choose your fruit, choose your nuts, and that's what makes this an endlessly changeable, adaptable recipe for whatever you happen to have around. So I'm just going to sprinkle the nuts. And I think that was 1/3 of a cup. No, that was 35 grams of nuts, whatever that ends up being. Again, I'll put the measurements down below. Then I'm going to take out of the freezer that dough that we put in there. And what the cold has done is it's allowed us to be able to crumble this.
Crafty.
And so you get these little crunchy nuggets once it's cooked on top of this like crunchy shortbready kind of thing.
That's a cool technique.
It is. I quite like this one.
Or cold, as it were.
Oh, not so funny, huh? Not your best joke.
I know, I'm trying.
Yeah,
you can't
maybe
hit a home
hard.
run every time, you know.
Anyway, so the 1/2 cup sort of just spread it out as best you can. Some chunks are bigger, some chunks are smaller, and that's totally okay. And then once I've finished doing this, we're popping it in the oven. Now the oven, I didn't mention this off the top, but I'll put it down below, of course. The oven has been preheated to 180 Celsius, which is 350 Fahrenheit. And it's gonna go in there for about 40 minutes, 40 to 50, but keep an eye on it. You know, everybody's oven's a bit different. And if you haven't checked your oven's temperature, you might want to err on the side of caution and start looking at 30 minutes. You're going for a nice golden brown of the shortbready bits. The jam will bubble up and look lovely regardless. But yeah, so there you have what it looks like going into the oven. So you can see bits of jam poking through. You can see bits of the nuts, although they're almost exactly the same color as the dough. So it makes it harder for them to see. If these were hazelnuts or pecans, you'd see them much better. Anyway, I'm gonna pop this in and we'll come back when it's ready to come out of the oven and you can see how beautiful it is. See you then. So it's been 40 minutes and you can see how that's got a lovely golden color and that the jam has bubbled up.
Nice work.
Now because this is the kind of tart that has the bottom that comes out, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put it on top of a can and
It's a Christmas miracle.
It does that.
It's a Christmas miracle.
Anyway, so I'm gonna let that cool there. You can also, I mean, there is no reason why you can't. Ouch, that's very hot.
That's one reason.
You can also cool it wherever on a cooling rack. That's one trick. Anyway, that is your Italian jam tart or Fregolotta, and it's super yummy with a cup of coffee or tea or whatever you like, and it makes a nice ending to dinner, and it really wasn't hard at all. You know, as long as you have your, you know, you're all good. It's that easy. You can bake. You can make real food.